When I found my son sleeping in his car, I asked, "Where's the house I bought you?" He said his wife and Mill kicked him out, took the keys, and threatened to call the police. I just told him, "Don't worry, I'll handle this. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." At 62 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday evening in late August when I spotted the familiar blue Honda Civic parked under a flickering streetlight in the Walmart parking lot. Something about it caught my eye as I drove past, heading home from my weekly grocery run. The car looked abandoned, windows slightly fogged, sitting alone in the far corner where most people wouldn't bother to park. I almost drove on, almost. But something made me circle back, and that's when I saw him. My son Damien was curled up in the back seat, using what looked like an old jacket as a blanket. 28 years old, and he was sleeping in his car like some kind of vagrant. My heart stopped beating for a moment, then started hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I parked next to him and tapped gently on the window. He startled awake, eyes wide and panicked like a cornered animal. It took him a few seconds to recognize me, and when he did, the shame that washed over his face nearly broke me in half. "Dad?" His voice was muffled through the glass, thick with sleep and something else, something that sounded like defeat. He unlocked the door and slowly climbed out, stretching his cramped limbs. He looked terrible. Thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble covering his usually clean-shaven face. His clothes were wrinkled, like he'd been wearing them for days. "What are you doing here, son?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear it shaking. Damien wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the cracked asphalt, hands shoved deep in his pockets. I didn't have anywhere else to go. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "What about the house? The house I bought for you and Christine." That's when he looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that scared me more than anything else. It wasn't just sadness or embarrassment, it was fear. "She took it," he said quietly. "Christine and her mother. They changed the locks 3 days ago." I felt my mouth go dry. "They what?" "They said I don't deserve it anymore, said I'm a burden and that Christine needs to think about her future." His voice cracked slightly. "They told me if I tried to come back, they'd call the police and say I was threatening them." The parking lot around us felt like it was spinning. I gripped the door handle of my truck to steady myself. "Are you telling me that your wife and her mother kicked you out of the house I bought for you? The house that's in my name?" Damien's shoulders sagged even further. "I know it sounds crazy, Dad, but Eleanor, Christine's mom, she has all these legal documents. She showed them to me. Said Christine is the rightful owner now because we're married and I signed some papers." He pulled out a crumpled bottle of pills from his jacket pocket, shaking 2 into his palm. "She said my anxiety makes me confused about things like ownership and responsibility." I watched him swallow the pills dry and something cold settled in my stomach. "What are those?" "Anxiety medication. Dr. Peterson prescribed them. Christine says I need to take them twice a day or my panic attacks get worse." He put the bottle back in his pocket. "She's been helping me remember to take them for the past 6 months." 6 months? I tried to remember the last time I'd spoken to my son for more than 5 minutes. It had been longer than that, I realized with a sick feeling, much longer. After his mother died 2 years ago, I'd thrown myself into my own grief and isolation. I'd assumed Damien was fine with Christine. I'd assumed wrong. "How long have you been sleeping in your car?" 3 days. He leaned against the Honda, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "I tried calling you, but Christine said you were probably busy and wouldn't want to be bothered with our problems. She said I needed to figure things out on my own like a real man." My hands clenched into fists. "She said what?" "It's okay, Dad. She's probably right. I have been pretty useless lately. I can't seem to focus at work, I keep forgetting things, and I get overwhelmed really easily. Maybe I don't deserve the house." Listening to my son talk about himself like that was like watching someone slowly bleed to death. This wasn't the Damien I'd raised. My son had been confident, capable, funny. He'd had dreams and ambitions. The man standing in front of me seemed like a shadow of that person. "Son, listen to me very carefully," I said, stepping closer. "You deserve better than sleeping in a parking lot. That house isn't Christine's house. I bought it with my own money, $85,000 cash, and I put it in my name with the understanding that you and your wife would live there. No one has the right to kick you out of it." For the first time since I'd found him, Something flickered in Damien's eyes. Hope, maybe. Or just desperation. But the papers Eleanor showed me. I don't care what papers she showed you. I want you to come home with me tonight. We're going to figure this out. Damien hesitated, glancing back at his car like it was some kind of refuge. Christine said if I involved you, it would just prove I can't handle my own problems. She said you'd be disappointed in me for being so weak. The manipulation was so obvious, so cruel, that I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying something I'd regret. Instead, I put my hand on my son's shoulder. The only thing that would disappoint me is if you spent another night sleeping in this parking lot when I have a perfectly good guest room at home. He looked up at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee or had a bad dream. Are you sure? I'm sure. And tomorrow we're going to go have a conversation with your wife. Something shifted in Damien's expression, a flicker of worry that made my stomach tighten. Dad, you can't just show up there. Christine doesn't like unexpected visitors, and Eleanor gets really upset when people don't follow proper procedures. They have rules about... Rules? I interrupted. What kind of rules? Like, I'm supposed to call before I come over, even though it's supposed to be my house too, and I can't bring anyone with me without permission, and if I seem agitated or argumentative, I have to leave until I can discuss things calmly. The words came out in a rush, like he'd memorized them. Christine says it's because my mental state has been so unstable lately. Every word out of his mouth made me angrier. Damien, do you hear yourself? Do you hear what you're saying? He blinked at me, confused. What do you mean? You're talking about your own home like it's a prison with visiting hours. The confusion on his face deepened, and I realized that whatever had been done to him, it had been thorough. He genuinely couldn't see how wrong this all was. Come on, I said, gently guiding him toward my truck. Let's get you something to eat and a decent night's sleep. Tomorrow we'll deal with Christine and her mother. As we drove to my house, Damien stared out the window in silence. I kept glancing at him, trying to reconcile this broken version of my son with the young man I thought I knew. When had he gotten so thin? When had his shoulders started curving inward, like he was trying to make himself smaller? When had he started talking about himself like he was fundamentally flawed? Dad? His voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. Yeah, son? What if Christine's right? What if I really am too messed up to deserve the house? I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, then turned to face him fully. Damien, I need you to listen to me. There is nothing wrong with you that justifies being thrown out of your own home. Nothing. Do you understand me? He nodded, but I could see he didn't really believe it. The damage ran deeper than I'd imagined. As we walked into my house, I made a silent promise to myself and to my son. Whatever had been done to him, whatever lies he'd been told, whatever manipulation had reduced him to sleeping in parking lots and doubting his own worth, I was going to fix it. But first I had to understand exactly what I was dealing with, and that meant paying a visit to Christine and her mother, whether they liked unexpected visitors or not. The next morning I watched Damien pick at his breakfast like a bird afraid the food might be poisoned. He'd slept fitfully, calling out in his dreams, and when I'd checked on him at 3 a.m, he was sitting up in bed, staring at nothing, that bottle of pills clutched in his hands. Did you take your medication this morning? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. He nodded quickly. Christine always makes sure I take them with breakfast. She says skipping doses can cause severe withdrawal symptoms. I made a mental note to research those pills later. Are you ready to go to the house? The color drained from his face. Maybe we should call first, let them know we're coming. Christine really doesn't like... No. I set down my coffee cup with more force than necessary. We're not calling. This is our house, and we're going to walk through the front door like we own the place. Because we do. The drive to 1247 Maple Street took only 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Damien grew more agitated with each passing block, fidgeting with his seatbelt and checking his phone repeatedly. She's not answering my texts, he said, voice tight with anxiety. Maybe they're not home. Maybe we should come back later. But as we pulled into the driveway, I could see Christine's silver Lexus parked in the garage. A car I'd never seen before was parked on the street in front of the house, a black BMW with tinted windows. Someone else was here. The house looked different somehow. The small garden my late wife had helped Damien plant had been ripped up and replaced with decorative gravel. The welcome mat we'd bought them as a housewarming gift was gone, replaced with one that read, "By invitation only," in elegant script. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Christine stood there, perfectly dressed in a cream-colored sweater and pearls, her blonde hair pulled back in an immaculate bun. She looked like she was posing for a magazine photo, except for the cold expression in her green eyes. "Randall," she said, not moving from the doorway. "What a surprise." "Hello, Christine, I think we need to talk." She glanced at Damien, who had shrunk back behind me like a scolded child. "Damien, sweetie, you look terrible. Have you been taking your medication?" "Yes," he mumbled. "Twice yesterday and once this morning." "Good boy." The condescension in her voice made my teeth clench. She turned back to me. "I suppose Damien told you some confused version of what happened. His anxiety has been making him very paranoid lately. He told me you kicked him out of his own house and changed the locks." Christine's laugh was light and musical, completely at odds with the situation. "Oh, Randall, that's not what happened at all. Damien left on his own because he was having an episode. We were worried he might hurt himself, so we secured the house until he could get proper treatment." "An episode?" "His mental health has been deteriorating for months. Mood swings, aggression, paranoid thoughts. Dr. Peterson recommended inpatient treatment, but Damien refuses to go." She stepped aside, gesturing us into the house. "Mother is here. She can explain everything much better than I can." The moment I stepped inside, I felt like I was entering foreign territory. The furniture had been rearranged, the walls painted a cold gray instead of the warm yellow Damien and his mother had chosen together. Family photos had been replaced with abstract art that looked expensive and soulless. Eleanor Morrison sat in what used to be my son's favorite reading chair, a thick folder of papers spread across her lap. She was a severe-looking woman in her mid-50s with steel gray hair and the kind of thin lips that suggested she rarely smiled. She looked up at us with the expression of someone who'd found something unpleasant on the bottom of her shoe. "Randall," she said without standing, "I've been expecting this visit." "Have you?" I sat down across from her without being invited. Damien remained standing near the door, like he was ready to bolt. "Of course. When someone has a mental breakdown and starts spreading wild stories, it's natural for family members to get involved." Eleanor picked up a document from her pile. "I have all the necessary paperwork right here. Medical evaluations, competency assessments, power of attorney documents." My blood went cold. Power of attorney? Christine was granted temporary power of attorney 3 weeks ago, when Damien was hospitalized for a psychiatric evaluation. Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather. The doctor determined he was not competent to make financial or legal decisions in his current state. I looked at Damien, who was staring at the floor. "Son, you didn't tell me you were hospitalized." "It was only for 2 days," he said quietly. "I had a panic attack at work and collapsed. Christine said the doctor wanted to run some tests." "What kind of tests?" Christine stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Damien's arm. "Cognitive function, psychological evaluation, drug screening." The doctor was very concerned about his ability to care for himself. Something about the way she said it, the slight emphasis on drug screening, made my suspicious spike. "And what did these tests show?" Eleanor handed me a thick medical report. Severe anxiety disorder, depression, possible early-onset dementia, and substance abuse issues. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking with anger. The letterhead was legitimate, but something felt wrong about the whole thing. This says, he tested positive for multiple controlled substances. "That's impossible," I said, looking at Damien. "You don't use drugs." Damien looked confused, lost. "I don't understand it either. Dr. Peterson said maybe someone was putting things in my food or drinks without me knowing. He said it happens sometimes with people who have memory problems." The implication hit me like a physical blow. Someone had been drugging my son, and these women were using it as evidence that he was mentally incompetent. "Based on these medical findings," Eleanor continued, "Christine has been granted authority to make decisions regarding Damien's living situation, finances, and medical care. Moving him out of this house was a necessary safety measure." "Safety measure?" My voice was dangerously low. "For whom?" "For everyone," Christine said smoothly. "Damien's behavior has become increasingly erratic. Last week he accused me of moving his things around the house. He claimed I was trying to confuse him deliberately. That kind of paranoid thinking is very concerning." I watched my son's face crumple with shame and self-doubt. "Maybe I did imagine it," he whispered. "I have been forgetting a lot of things lately." "Of course you have, sweetie," Christine said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "That's why you need proper care. Professional care." The pieces were starting to come together in my mind, forming a picture so ugly I almost couldn't believe it. But the evidence was right there in front of me. My son, systematically drugged and gaslit into believing he was mentally ill. His wife, using his condition to gain control of his life and assets. His mother-in-law providing legal and logistical support for what amounted to psychological abuse. "I want to see the original deed to this house," I said. Eleanor smiled for the first time since I'd arrived, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I'm afraid that won't be necessary. As Damien's power of attorney, Christine has full authority over any property assets." "That's not how property ownership works, Eleanor." "Actually, it is." She pulled out another document. "This house was purchased as a marital asset. Under state law, both spouses have equal claim to marital property. Given Damien's incompetence determination, Christine's claim takes precedence." I could see Damien wilting with every word, believing these lies about his own inadequacy. The systematic destruction of his self-worth was so thorough, so cruel, that I wanted to grab both these women and shake them until they admitted what they were doing. Instead, I stood up slowly, my decision made. "I think I've heard enough." "Good," Christine said, relief evident in her voice. "I'm glad you understand that this is what's best for Damien. We've looked into some excellent facilities where he can get the help he needs." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I turned to my son. "Damien, we're leaving, now." "But Dad, maybe they're right. Maybe I do need—" "No." I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling how thin he'd gotten through his shirt. "You don't need anything these people are offering." Eleanor stood up, her expression hardening. "Mr. Patterson, if you try to remove Damien from our care against medical advice, we'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement. Christine has legal authority here." "Does she?" I pulled out my phone and speed-dialed a number I knew by heart. "Let me just check on that. Who are you calling?" Christine's composure was starting to crack. "My lawyer." I held her gaze as the phone rang. Because I'm pretty sure that power of attorney documents based on fraudulent medical reports aren't worth the paper they're printed on. The color drained from both women's faces. Eleanor quickly started shuffling her papers together while Christine moved to block Damien from leaving. "You can't prove anything," Christine said, but her voice had lost its confident tone. "Can I?" I smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "We'll see about that." As my lawyer's voice came through the phone, I watched Christine and Eleanor exchange a look that confirmed everything I suspected. They'd been caught, and they knew it. But I also knew this was just the beginning. Whatever these two had done to my son, whatever web of lies and manipulation they'd spun, it was going to take more than one confrontation to unravel it all. The real fight was just starting. My lawyer's voice was crisp and professional through the phone speaker. "Randall, I need you to listen carefully. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and get out of that house immediately. Bring Damien with you." I could see Christine and Eleanor whispering urgently in the corner while Damien stood frozen in the middle of the living room, looking like he might collapse from anxiety at any moment. "We're leaving now," I told my lawyer, then hung up and turned to my son. "Come on, Damien, we're going." "But what about my things?" he asked, glancing around the house that should have been his sanctuary. "My clothes, my books, We'll deal with that later." I took his arm gently but firmly. "Right now, we need to go." Christine stepped forward, her mask of concerned wife slipping completely. "You can't just take him, Randall. I have legal documents that prove—" "Your documents are worth nothing if they're based on fraud," I said, not bothering to keep the anger out of my voice anymore. "And I'm starting to think that's exactly what they are." Eleanor's face had gone pale, but she rallied quickly. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Patterson. Interfering with medical treatment orders could result in criminal charges." "Then I guess we'll let the courts sort it out." As we walked toward the door, Damien suddenly stopped and turned back. "Christine, I'm sorry. I don't want to cause problems. Maybe if I just—" "No," I said firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for." But watching my son try to placate the woman who had been systematically destroying him broke something inside my chest. The damage went so much deeper than I'd realized. The drive to my lawyer's office was tense and quiet. Damien kept checking his phone, growing more agitated with each passing mile. "She's not answering my calls," he said for the third time. "She always answers my calls. What if something's wrong? What if she needs me?" I glanced at him in disbelief. "Son, she kicked you out of your house and had you sleeping in a parking lot. Why are you worried about her needing you?" "Because that's what married people do," he said, his voice taking on that rehearsed quality I was beginning to recognize. "Christine always says that love means putting your partner's needs before your own, even when they're upset with you." The more he talked, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just financial manipulation or property theft. This was a comprehensive psychological assault designed to remake my son into someone completely dependent and controllable. My lawyer, David Chen, had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years. He was a sharp man in his early 50s who never missed a detail. When we walked into his office, he took one look at Damien and his expression grew concerned. "Damien, you've lost weight," David said, gesturing for us to sit down. "Have I?" Damien touched his stomach absently. "Christine says I look better thinner. She's been helping me eat healthier." David and I exchanged a look. "What exactly does healthier mean?" David asked. "Smaller portions, mostly. And I'm not supposed to eat after 6 in the evening because it interferes with my medication absorption." Damien pulled out his pill bottle again, checking the time on his phone. "Actually, I should take my afternoon dose soon." "What medication is that?" David asked. Damien handed over the bottle. David examined the label, his frown deepening. "This is a pretty heavy dosage of alprazolam. Who prescribed this?" "Dr. Peterson. He's Christine's family doctor. He said my anxiety was getting dangerous and I needed stronger medication to prevent panic attacks." David looked at me over Damien's head, his expression grave. "Randall, we need to talk privately for a moment. Damien, would you mind waiting in the reception area? There are magazines and coffee." After Damien left, David closed the door and sat down heavily. "This is worse than you described on the phone." "How bad are we talking?" "The medication alone is concerning. That's a dosage I'd expect to see for someone with severe panic disorder, but it's also highly addictive and can cause memory problems, confusion, and dependency. If he's been taking this regularly for months..." David trailed off, shaking his head. "What about the legal documents Eleanor showed me?" David pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "Power of attorney based on incompetency determination requires very specific procedures. Court hearings, multiple medical opinions, family notification requirements. If they bypassed any of those steps, the documents are invalid." "And the house? You said you bought it outright and it's in your name?" $85,000 cash. The deed is in my name with Damien listed as beneficiary." "Then legally, it's your house. Marriage doesn't automatically transfer property ownership, especially property that was purchased before the marriage with separate funds." David looked up from his notes. "But Randall, I'm more concerned about your son right now than the property. What you're describing sounds like systematic abuse." The word hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Abuse. I'd been thinking manipulation, control, even theft. But abuse was what this really was. What do we do? First, we get Damien to a real doctor, independent medical evaluation, blood tests to see what's actually in his system. Second, we gather documentation, bank records, medical records, anything that shows a pattern of control or deception. David leaned forward. Third, you need to prepare for this to get ugly. If Christine and her mother are willing to go this far, they're not going to give up easily. Over the next 3 days, the true scope of the deception began to reveal itself. David had called in favors with a doctor friend who agreed to see Damien immediately. Dr. Sarah Williams was a psychiatrist who specialized in medication management and psychological trauma. After a 2-hour evaluation, she asked to speak with me privately while Damien waited outside. "Mr. Patterson, I'm going to be direct with you," Dr. Williams said, her expression serious. "Your son has been significantly over-medicated for months, possibly longer. The dosage of alprazolam he's been taking would sedate most people to the point of barely functioning." "Is that why he seems so confused and exhausted all the time?" "Partly, but there's more." She pulled out a folder of test results. "The blood work shows traces of other substances that aren't in his prescribed medication. Someone has been giving him additional sedatives, probably in his food or drinks." My hands clenched into fists. "Proof that he's being drugged?" "Medically, yes. Legally, it's more complicated. The substances could have been given without his knowledge, or he could have taken them himself if he was confused about his medication schedule. Dr. Williams hesitated. But combined with what you've told me about his living situation and the psychological control, I believe your son has been the victim of systematic psychological and medical abuse. That afternoon, while Damien napped off the effects of the medication withdrawal Dr. Williams had started him on, I drove to the bank where I'd maintained accounts for 30 years. The branch manager, Patricia Ross, had handled the mortgage and purchase of Damien's house personally. "Randall, good to see you," Patricia said, leading me into her office. "What can I help you with today?" "I need to see all the account activity related to the house I bought for my son. Any attempts to change ownership, transfer funds, or access the account." Patricia's fingers flew over her keyboard. After a few minutes, her expression shifted to concern. "Randall, there have been several attempts to access this account in the past 3 months. Someone has been calling claiming to be Damien's power of attorney, requesting account information and trying to add Christine Patterson as a joint account holder. Did you give them any information?" "No, because the power of attorney documents they faxed over didn't match our security requirements. They were missing court seals and proper notarization." Patricia printed out several pages, but they were very persistent. The last call was just 2 days ago. I studied the call logs. 5 attempts in August alone, all from someone claiming to represent Christine or Eleanor. They'd been planning this for months. "There's something else," Patricia said quietly. "Yesterday, we received a faxed request to transfer the deed of the property to Christine Patterson with what appeared to be your forged signature." The room felt like it was tilting. "Forged signature?" "Our signature verification flagged it immediately. It was a good forgery, but not good enough." She handed me a copy of the document. "Someone spent considerable time and effort trying to steal your house, Randall." That evening, I sat across from Damien at my kitchen table, watching him eat his first real meal in days. Dr. Williams had warned me that withdrawal from the medication would be difficult, and I could already see the effects. His hands shook slightly, and he kept looking around nervously, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been since I found him in that parking lot. "Dad, I need to ask you something," he said suddenly, "and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course." "Do you think there's something wrong with my brain? Like, medically wrong?" The question broke my heart. "Why would you ask that?" "Because Christine and Dr. Peterson keep telling me I'm sick, that I can't trust my own thoughts or memories. But since I stopped taking those pills, I've been remembering things." He set down his fork, his voice growing stronger. "I remember Christine moving my belongings around the house and then acting confused when I couldn't find them. I remember her canceling plans with my friends and telling me they called to cancel. I remember her telling me you said I was a disappointment and that you didn't want to see me anymore." Rage filled my chest so completely I thought I might explode. I never said any of those things. "I know that now. But when you're medicated and confused all the time and someone you trust keeps telling you things that don't feel right but sound possible," he shrugged helplessly, "you start believing maybe you really are losing your mind." "Damien, listen to me very carefully. Your mind is fine. You were being systematically poisoned and manipulated by people who wanted to control you. That's not mental illness, that's abuse." For the first time since I'd found him in that parking lot, my son looked me directly in the eyes. "Dad, I think they were planning to have me committed permanently." "What makes you say that?" "Because Eleanor kept talking about long-term care facilities and how much money it would cost. She said I'd probably need to be there for years, maybe forever." Damien's voice was barely above a whisper, and she seemed happy about it. The pieces of their plan were becoming horribly clear. Get Damien declared mentally incompetent, gain control of his assets and property, then warehouse him somewhere where he couldn't interfere with their lives or their theft. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Christine's name appeared on the screen. "Don't answer it," Damien said quickly, panic creeping back into his voice. "Why not?" "Because she'll want to know where I am and she'll be angry that I left without permission. She doesn't like it when I make decisions without consulting her first." I looked at my 28-year-old son, afraid to answer a phone call from his own wife, and something inside me snapped. I picked up the phone. "What do you want, Christine?" "Where is my husband?" Her voice was cold and sharp, nothing like the sweet, concerned tone she'd used in front of other people. "Damien is exactly where he belongs, with his family. I am his family, I'm his wife, and if you don't bring him back immediately, I'm going to have you arrested for kidnapping and elder abuse." I almost laughed at the audacity. Elder abuse? Damien is 28 years old. He's been declared mentally incompetent, which makes him a vulnerable adult under state protection laws. Removing him from his authorized care is a felony. Your power of attorney is fraudulent, Christine. The hospital records are fraudulent. The medication regimen was designed to incapacitate him, and we have documentation of all of it. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Not the fake sweetness or even the cold anger, but something much more dangerous. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Randall. You think you can just waltz in and destroy everything I've worked for? You think some old man with a lawyer can outsmart me? Her laugh was bitter and ugly. I've been planning this for 3 years. 3 years of careful documentation, medical records, witness statements. I own your son and I own that house, and there's nothing you can do about it. The mask was completely off now, and what I saw underneath was terrifying. We'll see about that, I said and hung up. Damien was staring at me with wide eyes. She's really angry, isn't she? Yes, she is, because she's been caught. But as I looked at my son, still trembling slightly from medication withdrawal, still afraid of his own wife, I realized that proving Christine's guilt was only the first step. The real battle would be helping Damien recover from what she'd done to him and protecting him from whatever desperate measures she might take now that her plan was falling apart. And based on that phone call, I had a feeling Christine wasn't finished with us yet. The restraining order arrived by courier the next morning while Damien was taking his first shower in a week without someone timing him. I stood in my kitchen, reading the official court document that painted me as a dangerous predator who had kidnapped a vulnerable adult from his loving caregivers. According to Christine's sworn statement, I had forcibly removed Damien from proper medical supervision, threatened his legal guardians with violence, and was currently preventing him from receiving life-saving psychiatric treatment. The order gave me 24 hours to return Damien to Christine's custody or face immediate arrest. It's very well done, David said over the phone after I read him the document. Professionally prepared, filed in the right jurisdiction, all the proper legal language. If I didn't know better, I'd say she had experienced legal help. What do you mean, experienced? This isn't something you throw together overnight, Randall. Someone with knowledge of elder law and psychiatric commitment procedures helped her create this paperwork. Someone who knows exactly how to manipulate the system. I thought about Eleanor's thick folder of documents, her confident manner when discussing power of attorney laws. The mother-in-law, she must have legal experience. That would make sense. Look, we can fight this, but it's going to take time, and until we get a hearing, you're technically in violation of a court order. Damien appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking more alert than I'd seen him in days, but still fragile. His color was better and the constant tremor in his hands had mostly stopped, but there were still dark circles under his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, noticing my expression. "Is it Christine?" I folded the restraining order and put it in my pocket. No point in frightening him more than necessary. Just some legal paperwork. Nothing we can't handle. But Damien wasn't fooled. "She's trying to make me come back, isn't she?" "Yes." He sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking much older than his 28 years. "Maybe I should just go back, avoid all the trouble." "Absolutely not." "But Dad, you don't understand what she's capable of when she's angry. The last time I upset her, she—" He trailed off, staring at the table. "She what?" "She called Dr. Peterson and told him I was having violent fantasies. He increased my medication and recommended I be hospitalized for observation." Damien's voice was barely audible. "I spent 5 days in a psychiatric ward because I asked her why she'd thrown away my mother's recipe book. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away." "She had you committed for asking about your mother's recipes?" "She said I was becoming obsessive about dead people and that it was unhealthy for my recovery." He looked up at me, eyes full of shame. "The doctors there said I had signs of early dementia, that I was creating false memories about my mother because I couldn't accept her death. I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from putting my fist through the wall. Damien, your memories of your mother are not false. She did have a recipe book. She left it to you specifically in her will." "Really?" "Really. It's in the storage unit with the rest of her things. We'll go get it this afternoon." For a moment, my son looked like the child who used to help his mother bake cookies every Sunday, eager and hopeful. Then the expression faded, replaced by that learned helplessness Christine had trained into him. What if the doctors were right, though? What if I am sick and I just don't realize it? Before I could answer, my phone rang. An unknown number, but something about the timing made my stomach tighten. I answered warily, "Mr. Patterson, this is Dr. Peterson." The voice was smooth and professional with just a hint of condescension. "I understand you've removed Damien from his prescribed care regimen." "And you are?" "I'm Damien's psychiatrist. I've been treating him for severe anxiety disorder and early cognitive decline. His wife is very concerned about his current state." I could see Damien tense up at the mention of his name. He knew this voice, and it scared him. "Dr. Peterson, I've had my son evaluated by an independent psychiatrist. Your diagnosis appears to be inaccurate." "I'm sure you believe that, Mr. Patterson, but family members often have difficulty accepting a loved one's mental health decline. Denial is very common in these situations." His tone was patronizing, like he was explaining something to a slow child. "Damien requires specialized care that you simply aren't qualified to provide. What I think Damien requires is to be free from people who drug him without his knowledge." The silence on the other end was telling. When Dr. Peterson spoke again, his voice was slightly less confident. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but I've always followed proper medical protocols with Damien's treatment. Protocols that included prescribing massive doses of alprazolam for anxiety that conveniently disappeared the moment he stopped taking your pills. Withdrawal symptoms can temporarily mask underlying conditions. This apparent improvement is likely temporary and potentially dangerous." Dr. Peterson's voice was getting sharper. "If Damien continues without proper medication, he could have a complete psychological break. He could become violent." I looked at my son, who was sitting quietly at my kitchen table eating cereal and looking more peaceful than he had in months. "He seems pretty stable to me." "Mr. Patterson, I have a legal and ethical obligation to ensure Damien's safety. If you continue to prevent him from receiving proper treatment, I'll have no choice but to involve Adult Protective Services." "You do that, doctor, and while you're at it, maybe you can explain to them why your patient was found sleeping in a parking lot while under your care." I hung up before he could respond, but I knew this wasn't over. The web of people involved in manipulating Damien was bigger than just Christine and Eleanor. "Was that really Dr. Peterson?" Damien asked, his voice small. "Yes." He sounded angry. Damien pushed his cereal around in the bowl nervously. "He doesn't like it when I miss appointments or don't follow his instructions exactly." "What happens when you don't follow his instructions?" "He adjusts my medication, makes me come in for more frequent visits. Sometimes he recommends additional testing or hospitalization if he thinks I'm becoming unstable." Damien set down his spoon. "Dad, what if he's right? What if I really do need all those pills and I'm just too sick to realize it?" It was heartbreaking, watching my son doubt his own reality because of months of systematic gaslighting. "Damien, do you feel sick right now, this moment without the pills?" He considered this carefully. "No, I feel clearer, like fog lifting. But Christine always said the medication would make me feel worse before it made me feel better." "For how long?" "She said it could take years to find the right combination, that I needed to be patient and trust the process." Years. They had planned to keep him medicated and compliant for years while they stripped away everything he owned and turned him into a permanent dependent. My phone rang again. This time it was David. "Randall, we have a problem. I just got a call from the court. Christine has filed an emergency petition for psychiatric commitment. She's claiming Damien is in immediate danger and needs to be involuntarily hospitalized." My blood turned to ice. "Can she do that?" "If she can convince a judge that he's mentally ill and dangerous to himself or others, yes. The hearing is set for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. "Tomorrow? That fast?" Emergency psychiatric commitments get expedited hearings, and she's got Dr. Peterson backing her up with medical testimony about Damien's deteriorating condition and history of hospitalization. I looked at my son, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing alarm. If Christine succeeded with this petition, she could have him locked away indefinitely, drugged into compliance while she finished stealing everything he owned. "What do we need to do?" "We need our own medical expert. Dr. Williams agreed to testify about Damien's current condition and the medication issues, but we're fighting an uphill battle. Christine has months of documented mental health history to point to." After I hung up, Damien was staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. "She's trying to have me committed, isn't she?" There was no point in lying. "Yes." "And she can do that? Even though I don't want to go?" "She can try, but we're going to fight it." Damien was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he finally spoke, his voice was stronger than I'd heard it in days. Dad, there's something I need to tell you about Christine. Something I remembered yesterday when the medication started wearing off. What is it? The night before she kicked me out of the house, I woke up around 2 in the morning and heard her talking to someone on the phone. He took a shaky breath. She was talking about having me committed permanently. She said once I was locked away, she'd have complete control over everything and you wouldn't be able to interfere. My hands clenched into fists. Did you hear anything else? She said something about a facility in Nevada where they specialize in long-term psychiatric patients, where families can sign someone in but the patients can't sign themselves out. Damien's voice dropped to a whisper. She was laughing about it, Dad. She was laughing about locking me away forever. The scope of Christine's plan was becoming horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about completely erasing my son from existence, turning him into a convenient psychiatric patient while she lived in his house and spent his inheritance. There's more, Damien continued. I heard her talking to her mother about you too. Eleanor said if you tried to interfere, they could probably have you declared an unfit guardian because of your age, get you declared mentally incompetent too. So that was their backup plan. If they couldn't get rid of me through legal intimidation, they'd use the same psychiatric manipulation tactics they'd used on Damien. Dad, I'm scared. My son looked at me with the same expression he'd had as a child during thunderstorms. What if they win? What if I end up locked in some hospital forever and there's nothing we can do about it? I reached across the table and took his hand. It was steadier now, stronger than it had been in days. That's not going to happen, son, I promise you. How can you be sure? Because looking at my son now, seeing him clear-headed and alert for the first time in months, I realized something Christine and her accomplices had overlooked. They'd spent so much time and energy breaking Damien down that they'd forgotten what he was capable of when he wasn't drugged into submission. My son wasn't just a victim. He was a witness. And tomorrow morning he was going to tell a judge exactly what had been done to him. Because we're going to tell the truth, Damien, all of it. For the first time since I'd found him in that parking lot, my son smiled. Really smiled, not the nervous, medicated grimace I'd gotten used to seeing. You know what, Dad? I think I'm ready to fight back. But as I watched him square his shoulders with determination I hadn't seen in years, I couldn't shake the feeling that Christine had one more card to play. And people desperate enough to drug someone for months and fake psychiatric evaluations weren't likely to give up just because they'd been caught. The real battle was about to begin, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go to win it. The courthouse, at 8:30, the morning was already bustling with activity, but I felt like we were walking into a battlefield. Damien stayed close beside me, his newly clear eyes taking in everything with an alertness I hadn't seen in months. He'd insisted on wearing his best suit, the one he'd bought for job interviews before Christine convinced him he was too sick to work. You ready for this? I asked as we climbed the stone steps. More ready than I've been for anything in a long time, he said, and I was surprised by the strength in his voice. David met us in the hallway outside the courtroom, looking grim. I won't lie to you, this is going to be tough. Christine's legal team is very well prepared. Legal team? 3 attorneys. Corporate-level representation. Someone is spending serious money on this case. David lowered his voice. And they've filed additional motions this morning. They're trying to get you declared an unfit guardian based on your age and claiming you're suffering from early dementia yourself. The audacity took my breath away. Based on what evidence? Apparently, your decision to remove Damien from proper medical care demonstrates impaired judgment and possible cognitive decline. David's expression was disgusted. It's a stretch, but if they can convince the judge you're not competent to make decisions for Damien, then Christine gets everything by default. I felt the pieces of their backup plan falling into place. This was always part of their strategy. We entered the courtroom, and I immediately spotted Christine sitting at the plaintiff's table with her legal team. She was dressed in a conservative black suit, her hair pulled back severely, playing the role of concerned wife perfectly. Eleanor sat behind her in the gallery, wearing an expression of righteous concern. What surprised me was the third person at their table. A tall man in an expensive suit who looked more like a corporate lawyer than someone who handled psychiatric commitment cases. Who's the third attorney? I whispered to David. He checked his notes. Richard Blackwell, senior partner at Morrison, Blackwell and Associates. Morrison? I looked back at Eleanor, who was watching us with cold satisfaction. Any relation to Eleanor Morrison? Her ex-husband. She kept the name after the divorce. David's eyes widened as the implication hit him. This isn't just personal, Randall. This is a family business. The judge, Honorable Patricia Wells, was a stern-looking woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. She'd clearly reviewed the case files thoroughly before entering the courtroom. This is an emergency hearing regarding the psychiatric commitment of Mr. Damien Patterson, she announced. I've reviewed the petitions and supporting documentation. Ms. Patterson, you may present your case. Christine's lead attorney, a polished woman named Sarah Hendricks, stood up with theatrical concern. Your Honor, this is a heartbreaking case of a loving family trying to protect a severely mentally ill young man from his own deteriorating condition and from family members who refuse to accept the reality of his diagnosis. She launched into a carefully crafted narrative, painting Damien as increasingly unstable, violent, and delusional. She presented Dr. Peterson's medical records, the forged psychiatric evaluations, and testimony from neighbors claiming they'd heard disturbing behavior from the house. Mr. Patterson's father has removed him from all medical supervision, despite clear evidence that the patient requires intensive psychiatric care, Hendricks continued. This represents a clear and present danger to Mr. Patterson's well-being and to the safety of others. Dr. Peterson took the stand, his testimony smooth and professional. He described Damien's alleged deterioration, his violent tendencies, and his need for long-term institutional care. Everything was presented as medical fact, backed by official-looking documentation. In my professional opinion, Dr. Peterson concluded, Mr. Patterson requires immediate involuntary commitment to prevent further deterioration and possible harm to himself or others. When it was our turn, David stood up with quiet confidence. Your Honor, this case represents one of the most systematic and cruel cases of abuse I've encountered in 20 years of practice. Mr. Patterson has not been receiving medical care. He has been the victim of a coordinated scheme to render him mentally incompetent through over-medication and psychological manipulation. Dr. Williams took the stand, her testimony precise and damning. She explained the excessive medication, the additional sedatives found in Damien's blood work, and the rapid improvement in his condition once the drugs were removed. Your Honor, Mr. Patterson was not mentally ill. He was being systematically poisoned. Christine's attorney objected, claiming the testimony was speculation, but Dr. Williams had documentation. Blood tests, medication analysis, expert opinions on the psychological effects of the drug combinations Damien had been given. Then David called me to the stand. Mr. Patterson, you purchased a house for your son and daughter-in-law in 2019. Can you tell the court about the ownership structure of this property? I purchased the house for $85,000 cash. The deed is in my name with Damien listed as beneficiary. It was always understood that they would live there, but legally I retained ownership. And what attempts have been made to change this ownership? I pulled out the bank documents Patricia had given me. Multiple attempts to transfer the deed, add Christine as a joint owner, and access the property accounts, all using forged documentation and fraudulent power of attorney claims. Christine's face had gone pale, but her attorney was quick to object. Your Honor, property disputes are not relevant to psychiatric commitment proceedings. But Judge Wells was listening intently. I think they're very relevant, Counselor. Please continue, Mr. Patterson. David handed me another document. Can you identify this? This is the original deed to the house. As you can see, it's never been legally transferred. Christine Patterson has no legal claim to this property. The courtroom was dead silent. Christine was whispering urgently with her attorneys, and Eleanor's face had gone white. Your Honor, David continued, this was never about mental health care. This was about financial control. Mrs. Patterson and her associates systematically drugged Mr. Patterson into compliance while attempting to steal his inheritance and property. Judge Wells called for a brief recess, and I could see Christine's legal team in heated discussion. When court resumed, their strategy had completely shifted. Your Honor, Hendricks said, standing again but with noticeably less confidence. Even if there are property disputes to be resolved, that doesn't change the medical evidence regarding Mr. Patterson's mental state. Actually, it does, David replied, because we have evidence that the medical evaluations themselves were fraudulent. He presented the bank records showing payments from Eleanor Morrison to Dr. Peterson's practice, payments that coincided with each of Damien's psychiatric evaluations. He showed documentation of the forged hospital admission records and evidence that the psychiatric facility Dr. Peterson claimed to have used didn't actually exist. Dr. Peterson has been paid over $15,000 by Mrs. Morrison over the past 8 months to provide false medical documentation supporting this scheme. Dr. Peterson, who had been looking confident throughout his testimony, was now visibly sweating. Christine had slumped in her chair, and Eleanor was staring at the exit like she was calculating how quickly she could leave. But David wasn't finished. Your Honor, we also have testimony from Mr. Patterson himself about the abuse he suffered. Damien stood up, and for the first time in months I saw the man he used to be. Straight shoulders, clear eyes, determined voice. Your Honor, my wife and her mother have been drugging me for nearly a year. They controlled when I ate, when I slept, who I could talk to. They convinced me I was mentally ill and that I couldn't trust my own thoughts or memories. His voice grew stronger with each word. They were planning to have me committed permanently to a facility in Nevada where I would never be able to leave while they took everything my father had provided for me. Judge Wells listened to every word, her expression growing increasingly severe. They made me believe I was worthless, that I was a burden, that I deserved to lose everything because I was too sick to function. Damien looked directly at Christine. But I'm not sick, I was being poisoned. Christine's attorney tried to object, claiming Damien was having a delusional episode, but Judge Wells cut her off. I've heard enough, the judge said sharply. This court finds no evidence that Mr. Patterson requires psychiatric commitment. In fact, the evidence suggests he has been the victim of systematic abuse designed to render him incompetent. She turned to Christine's legal team with obvious disgust. I'm referring this case to the district attorney for investigation of fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy charges. I'm also issuing an immediate restraining order preventing Mrs. Patterson from contacting Mr. Patterson or attempting to access the property in question. Christine stood up abruptly, her mask finally slipping completely. This is ridiculous. He's my husband. I was trying to help him. Mrs. Patterson, Judge Wells said coldly, you will sit down and remain silent or I will hold you in contempt. But Christine had lost all control. You don't understand. He was worthless before I met him. I made him into something. I deserved that house. I deserved... That's enough. Judge Wells banged her gavel. Mrs. Patterson, you are hereby found in contempt of court. Bailiff, please remove her from my courtroom. As Christine was escorted out, still shouting about her rights and how unfair everyone was being, Eleanor quietly stood up and walked toward the exit. But David was ready for that too. Your Honor, Mrs. Morrison is also named in the fraud investigation. I believe she should be prevented from leaving the jurisdiction. Judge Wells nodded to the bailiff, who moved to intercept Eleanor at the door. For the first time since this nightmare began, Eleanor looked genuinely afraid. The court is also ordering immediate restitution of any funds illegally accessed, and Mr. Patterson Sr. will regain full control of his property effective immediately, Judge Wells concluded. This hearing is adjourned. As we walked out of the courthouse, Damien was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to me with tears in his eyes. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I let them do this to our family. Son, you have nothing to apologize for. You were a victim. But I should have seen it. I should have known. You couldn't have known. They were experts at this. They probably did it before to other people. I put my arm around his shoulders. What matters is that it's over now. But as we walked down the courthouse steps, I realized it wasn't quite over yet. Damien was free, the house was secure, and Christine and Eleanor would face justice for what they'd done. But there was still one more thing that needed to happen. My son needed to remember who he really was, and I needed to help him build a life worth living again. The legal battle was won, but the real work of healing was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of the house on 1247 Maple Street, watching my son make coffee with steady hands and a clear mind. The transformation was remarkable, but it hadn't happened overnight. The first few weeks after the court hearing had been the hardest. Damien's withdrawal from the medications had caused severe anxiety, sleepless nights, and moments of panic when he couldn't tell what memories were real and what had been planted by months of gaslighting. There were days when he'd call me in tears, convinced that maybe Christine had been right about him after all. But slowly, day by day, he'd gotten stronger. You know what I realized yesterday? Damien said, handing me a perfectly brewed cup of coffee in the blue ceramic mug his mother had bought him for his 18th birthday. What's that? I haven't thought about taking a pill in 3 weeks, not once. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Christine had held court with her fake documents and threats. For almost a year, I couldn't go 15 minutes without checking my pill bottle, making sure I was taking everything on schedule, and now I don't even think about it. The kitchen looked completely different now. Damien had repainted the walls the warm yellow his mother had originally chosen, brought back the family photos Christine had stored away, and filled the windowsill with herbs he was learning to grow. The house felt alive again. "How's the job search going?" I asked. "Actually, I have some news about that." Damien's smile was genuine now, not the medicated mask I'd gotten used to seeing. "Remember my old supervisor at the engineering firm, Jake Morrison?" I nodded. Jake had been one of the friends Christine had systematically cut out of Damien's life, telling him they were bad influences who didn't understand his medical needs. I called him last week, told him everything that happened. Damien took a sip of his coffee, his hands steady. He said he'd been wondering why I'd suddenly stopped answering his calls and canceled all our plans. He thought maybe I was angry with him about something. "What did he say when you told him the truth?" "He was horrified. Apparently, Christine had called him once about 8 months ago, claiming I was having a mental breakdown and that contact with friends was making my condition worse. She asked him to stop reaching out to me for my own good." The systematic isolation had been so complete, so methodical. Christine had convinced everyone in Damien's life that staying away was an act of kindness. "Jake offered me my old job back," Damien continued. "Senior project engineer. Same salary I was making before, plus a raise to account for the time I was away. He said the team had never been the same without me." I felt a surge of pride watching my son talk about returning to work, about rebuilding his career and his life. "Are you going to take it?" "I already did. I start Monday." He grinned. "I'm nervous, but it's good nervous, excited nervous. I'd forgotten what that felt like." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us looking around the kitchen that had been the site of so much manipulation and control, now transformed back into a place of warmth and family. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you give up on me? When you found me in that parking lot, why didn't you just assume Christine was right and I really was too messed up to help?" The question caught me off guard. "Why would you think I'd give up on you?" "Because that's what everyone else did. My friends, my co-workers, even some of our relatives. Christine convinced them all that I was too sick to be around, that helping me would just enable my delusions." Damien's voice was thoughtful, not bitter. "But you took one look at the situation and knew something was wrong. How did you know?" I thought about that night in the parking lot, the moment I'd seen my son curled up in the back seat of his car. "Because you're my son. And the person sleeping in that parking lot wasn't the man I raised." "But what if you'd been wrong? What if I really was mentally ill and you were just in denial?" "Then I would have gotten you proper help. Real help. Not the kind of help that involves drugging you into compliance and stealing your inheritance." I leaned forward, wanting him to understand this completely. "Damien, even if you had been genuinely sick, you still wouldn't have deserved what they did to you." He nodded slowly, processing this. "I think that's what took me so long to fight back. I kept thinking that if I really was sick, then maybe I deserved to be treated like I couldn't take care of myself." "No one deserves that. Ever." We were interrupted by a knock at the front door. Damien tensed slightly, an old reflex from the months when unexpected visitors meant trouble, but when he looked through the window, his face lit up. "It's Jake," he said, opening the door to reveal a tall, bearded man carrying a 6-pack of beer and wearing a huge grin. "Damien, man, it's good to see you looking like yourself again." Jake pulled my son into a bear hug that would have knocked him over 6 months ago, but that he now returned with equal enthusiasm. "Dad, this is Jake Morrison. Jake, this is my father, Randall." Jake shook my hand with a firm grip and direct eye contact. "Mr. Patterson, I can't thank you enough for what you did for Damien. When he told me what was happening to him, what that woman was doing." He shook his head. "I still can't believe we all fell for it." "She was very convincing," I said. "She was evil," Jake said bluntly. "I've been kicking myself for months for not seeing through it. Damien's one of the smartest, most capable people I know. The idea that he suddenly became incompetent never made sense, but she had all these medical reports and legal documents. She fooled a lot of people, Damien said, including me. Jake popped open a beer and handed it to Damien, then offered one to me. Well, she's not fooling anyone anymore. Did you hear what happened to her? Damien and I exchanged glances. We deliberately avoided following the legal proceedings against Christine and Eleanor, wanting to focus on healing rather than revenge. What happened? Damien asked. Prison. 2 to 5 years for fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. Her mother got 3 to 7 years because she was the ringleader. Jake's satisfaction was evident. Turns out they'd done this before, to Eleanor's first husband. Convinced him he was developing Alzheimer's, had him committed, and took control of his assets. He died in the facility 2 years later. I felt sick. They killed someone. As good as. The investigation found a pattern going back 10 years. They'd target vulnerable men, usually through marriage or family connections, gradually isolate them and convince them they were mentally ill, then take everything they owned. Jake took a long pull of his beer. Damien wasn't their first victim. He was just the first one who got away. Damien was quiet, absorbing this information. How many people? At least 4 that they can prove. Maybe more. The FBI is still investigating. Jake clapped Damien on the shoulder. You saved other people by fighting back, man. They would have kept doing this if you hadn't stopped them. That evening, after Jake left, Damien and I sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful in a way it had never been when Christine lived here. I've been thinking about something, Damien said. About Mom. What about her? Christine always said that Mom wouldn't have wanted me to be weak, that she would have been disappointed in me for not being able to handle my problems. He was quiet for a moment. But that's not true, is it? No, son. That's not true at all. Mom would have seen right through Christine, wouldn't she? I smiled, remembering my late wife's uncanny ability to read people. Your mother would have had Christine figured out in about 15 minutes. She wouldn't have let any of this happen. I miss her, Damien said simply. Me too. We sat in comfortable silence, both thinking about the woman who had been the heart of our family, whose absence had made us vulnerable to predators like Christine and Eleanor. Dad, I want to ask you something else, and I want you to be honest with me. Always. Do you think I'll ever be able to trust someone again? To have a real relationship? He stared out at the street, his voice thoughtful rather than sad. Because I'm not sure I'll ever be able to tell if someone really cares about me or if they're just good at pretending. It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. I think you'll be more careful now, maybe more cautious, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. You'll just be better at recognizing the difference between someone who wants to control you and someone who wants to support you. How will I know the difference? Someone who truly cares about you will want you to be stronger, not weaker. They'll encourage your independence, not your dependence. They'll celebrate your successes, not use your struggles against you. I turned to look at him. You'll know because you'll feel more like yourself when you're with them, not less. Damien nodded slowly. That makes sense. Christine always made me feel like I was failing at being human. Like I needed her to interpret the world for me because I couldn't trust my own perceptions. And how do you feel now? Like I can trust myself again, like my thoughts and feelings are valid. He smiled. Like I'm enough just as I am. Those words, more than anything else, told me that my son had truly recovered. Not just from the drugs or the manipulation, but from the fundamental damage to his sense of self that Christine had inflicted. I'm proud of you, I said, for fighting back, for getting your life back, for becoming yourself again. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. Maybe not as quickly, but you would have figured it out eventually. You're stronger than you know, Damien. You always have been. As we sat there on the porch of the house that had almost been stolen from us, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky, I realized that something had been restored that was more valuable than any property or bank account. We had found each other again. The father who had been too distant, too wrapped up in his own grief to notice his son's pain. The son who had been systematically broken down until he forgot who he was. We had both been lost in different ways, and we had found our way back to each other. You know what I'm most grateful for? Damien said as we finally headed inside. What? That it happened while you were still here to help me. If they had succeeded in having you declared incompetent too, or if something had happened to you. He shook his head. I don't want to think about where I'd be right now. But none of that happened. We're both here, we're both okay, and we're both stronger than we were before. Yeah, Damien said, locking the front door securely behind us. We are. 6 months later, as I watched my son make his coffee with steady hands in the kitchen of his own house, I knew that we had won more than just a legal battle. We had won back our family, our trust, and our future, and that was worth more than any house, any inheritance, or any amount of money in the world.